But I know it's that time of the day when the sun is about to set, coffee is wearing off, and I don't even have a box of chocolates. But as Lisa said, stick with me. I have a lot of research insights and stats that you can use to convince your stakeholders to get some budget and do the magic that you want to do in terms of your empowering your data teams. I'm Archana Venkatraman. I head up our cloud data management research at IDC, and I focus especially in Europe because it's a very different beast. We think about things very differently here. We have considerations like digital sovereignty. We are a little bit more risk averse than our North American peers. So I've taken all that into context. And I want to start with some macroeconomic factors because we discussed a lot about, we honed into what's happening on the data side, but it's time to step back a little bit to see, set some context on what's happening. So that's where I want to start. So in 2020, when the pandemic hit us, resilience was the word of the year, right? And even in 2021, companies were thinking about, oh my God, how am I going to quickly do this U-turn and enable hybrid working? How am I going to empower the teams? Which projects do I need to cut? Which projects do I need to invest a lot more? So resilience was something they were thinking about in 2020, 2021. And boy, when 2022 came, it became even more difficult because not just the pandemic brought in different types of disruptions, but we saw a lot more storms of disruption. So we saw inflation, we saw energy price rises, there's looming recession. I think 80% of the companies we surveyed expect a recession in the especially in Europe. I mean, UK is already in recession, but they're expecting a severe one this year, which is going to last, they think, for about 2 years. So there are multiple storms of disruptions. They are all interwoven, and companies need to make sure that they navigate through this. So if resilience was the word of the year in 2021, 2022, and 2023, it is going to be efficiency, and companies are trying to see what they can do to get there. World Economic Forum calls this a polycrisis era. So a lot of companies are trying to get used to this polycrisis era and try to see what they can do to navigate through it, whether it's challenges around supply chain, and they're saying that we need to work around this disruption because it's no longer an exception, it's going to be a rule. So this is how it's going to be when it comes to supply chain for a long time. And they're trying to see how they can use data and insights to navigate through the supply chain disruption. So having looked at data for customer experience and creating those personalized experience, they were all bringing in some benefits, but companies saw that when they tried to use data to navigate through the supply chain crisis, it really made a big difference to the bottom line. So they're trying to use data in real, important use cases beyond just customer experiences. And there's also this sustainability is becoming a big part of how European organizations are thinking about when they're investing. So they're looking at their providers, and they want to share the same ethos when it comes to sustainability, because then they're looking at their scope 1, 2, and 3, and making sure they are satisfying their ESG friends within the organization as well. So it's going to become a key part of decision-making for a lot of organizations when they partner, because they partner with technology vendors. It's a long-term strategic partnership. It's no longer just a transactional deal when it comes to something as important as data. And the last one was very much about this polycrisis idea where companies are expecting a change in demand. This is an interesting one. If you look at the IT spend in Europe, we've seen, there's been record growth in 2021. But what I want to highlight here is if you see the last recession or the last financial crisis, 2008, 2009, you'll see that the IT spend went down as the GDP went down. But now we're beginning to see a divergence between IT spend and GDP. So even as GDP is expected to go down, companies are trying to spend on IT because they see this as an enabler to overcome those polycrisis challenges. So there's very much a divergence that we're beginning to see, whereas initially it went down with the GDP. So it tracked the economy, but now for the first time, it's not. But that's not to say that companies are just running helter-skelter and investing in everything. There is a great tech reprioritization that's happening. So we asked organizations, where are you investing? What is the top of list for technology, tech investment in 2023? And as you can see, data and analytics and all the aspects within that data layer, whether it's modern NoSQL databases, whether it's data engineering capabilities, they are trying to invest in all those data and analytics layer a lot more. So the dark blue part is where they are either they are increasing their spend, and the light blue part is where they are sustaining the spend, and the yellow or the orange one is where they are decreasing. So you can see companies are trying to cut on their end user device spend because they have invested a lot more in the last 2 years to enable that hybrid environment. But now they're trying to see that the more endpoints they have, the more risks they have. So they're trying to take a very detailed approach on how they're going to deal with it. But security, data, cloud, and automation and integration, a lot of what we spoke about today earlier is where a lot of organizations are trying to invest their money in. And this strategic investment is done with a vision to build what we call a trusted digital business platform, right? So it's a big word there, but what we mean is that organizations are not doing individual replacement of tech components. They're transforming from a platform point of view. They're building an intelligent platform. They're putting data at the heart of everything that they do, and they're not making decisions without gravity, right? If they're saying we have a cloud-first strategy, that is coming from a place of due diligence, that coming from a place where they have gotten the buy-in from security. It's coming from a place where there is top-down leadership, commitment, and sponsorship. So, and when that happens, a lot of good things happens to an organization because everyone's moving at the same speed, and it addresses a lot of cultural challenges because everyone is working towards the same goal. So we think that by the end of next year, European organizations that would have taken this approach and developed that trusted digital business platform, they are the ones that will be able to be a lot more resilient and deliver those business benefits and increase their revenues. So we highlighted there is this big tech reprioritization, right? So we delve deeper into all these foundational technologies and ask them, where exactly are you investing a lot more? So the dark purple colored boxes are the ones where there is going to be a 30% plus investment. So it's programmable infrastructure, which is very much software-defined environment. There is microservices and APIs and that cloud-native world. Then there is multi-cloud, data, and then security. If you see, there are 5 boxes which are dark purple. So that's where companies are really trying to invest to build that competitive advantage. And we've seen examples of that as well, right? So if you look at Sainsbury's, they have pretty much they've tried to build that digital business platform, and they very much focused on data first, data availability strategy, and build the platform with those ethos, and that helped them meet a lot more business requirements. So it's very much about the business benefits, whether it's faster speed to market or creating new revenue streams. So they brought in together all these different stakeholders to create that dream team, which includes security and risk professionals, to bring and create this cloud-based digital platform for success. And I think it's fair to say that we can include Roche and Swedbank into the list as well. So cloud is very much the de facto platform for data-driven strategies in modern times. So our research shows that 3/4 of organizations are adopting cloud with a view to become an intelligent organization or to progress their data-driven strategies. And 84% of them rely on cloud-based technologies for data management purposes. And nearly 70% of organizations that have used data in their business decisions, they're able to quantitatively demonstrate benefits. And success begets success. So once they show what is working, they're able to scale that, because then they can go to their stakeholders and say, look, we have taken those steps, we have taken the right measures, and it's yielding success. Let's do a little bit more on this. But cloud adoption in Europe is very, very nuanced. So we asked organizations, which of the following IT environments do you use? There's still a large propensity towards data center environments, but all the new investment is happening in the public cloud, in the multi-cloud, in niche and specialist data cloud. So it's very much a public cloud, hybrid cloud, and SaaS world that we are entering into. And especially if you look at UK, it's a little bit more aggressive, where you have public cloud, hybrid cloud, and you have multi-cloud environments. So companies are putting their right foot forward into the cloud, but they're doing it with all the due diligence. We asked companies, why are you moving to the cloud? So is it still the same old scale, agility, cheaper costs? And it was very interesting to see that low cost wasn't mentioned, because now companies are waking up to the fact that if you put garbage in the cloud, you'll get garbage out and a bill shock. So it's very important to make sure you adopt the cloud in the right way. So companies are making sure that they are citing right business benefits, and they're looking at the business value that they want before they adopt cloud. So many of them are even taking a workload-first approach. They are looking at instead of saying, we're going to be cloud-first, they're saying, we're going to be workload-first. This is the workload I want to modernize. This workload and the skills that I have lends itself very well to a particular kind of cloud, and that's what drives their adoption. So they're becoming a lot more nuanced and intelligent. And if you see, except for 2 cases, the achieved benefits are a lot more than the expected benefits. So cloud is still has that wow factor for a lot of companies, and it's making these cloud architects look good. And I think the 2 where it didn't fit very well, like the access to cloud-based ecosystems and creation of new business model revenues, is also down to the cultural aspect, where they were not able to, they were cordoned off from accessing all the capabilities in the marketplace, because their asset management team or procurement team created just a curated set of features or ecosystem capabilities that they can use in the cloud. And that kind of held a lot of organizations back. If you look at the data-driven use cases, so it's, we were looking at usage of cloud and how is it propelling any of these use cases. So it was very much on the customer experience side, organizational structure and agility, remote team enablement. So there were so many rich and different sets of data-driven use cases that was optimized or boosted by cloud. We had some security use cases as well, but they didn't make it to this list, or the bubbles were too tiny. And organizations want to make those use cases a lot bigger, but before they get there, they need to address a lot of challenges. So we have established very much the fact that we've crossed the tipping point, and data-driven strategy is now fundamental for a majority of European organizations. And people are walking the talk. It's not just a lip service to become an intelligent organization. There is money on the table. So budgets are rising. So this is our survey end of 2021, 2022, where we found that 41% of organizations in EMEA are looking to spend 25% of their IT budget exclusively on data-driven strategies. And that means looking at that governance layer, looking at that database layer, looking at the data protection layer, as well as AI and ML. So all the way through the entire data stack is where they are investing. Whereas if you compare that with the overall ICT growth, it was almost flatlining at 5%. But we have a lot of work to do. We did a maturity benchmark assessment of European organizations to see, we gave them a set of exhaustive 15 questions to see where they were across different dimensions, whether it was culture, whether it was technology, whether it was their data strategy, and we saw where they fitted in. And the results came out where 30% of organizations were very much in the starting stage of their data journeys, who we call the data crawlers. And then about half of organizations were in the walk phase, and then only less than 20% in the runner space, the ones who were extremely successful or more mature when it comes to data-driven strategies. And the journey from the walker stage to the runner stage is the one that's most difficult, because that's where you have to rehaul culture and strategy, because you can put in some technologies in places and move from crawl to walk walk phase, but it's the next level that's the most difficult. And we tried to do this exercise 6 months later with the same set of organizations, and some of them replotted themselves as one level lower. So it's very much a continuous journey, as has been emphasized here. So there's no full stop. Threats are evolving, your strategies are evolving, the business needs are evolving, the business people are very ingenious, they always want to try new things, they're always they're pushing the boundaries when it comes to asking for data. So it's a continuous journey. So there is very much an aspirational gap between organizations wanting to become data-driven and how much they are actually data-driven, where only 30% of organizations said that their organization is using data at a large scale in business decisions. And when you looked at the cloud as well, only 20% of users cited better insights from data as one of the business benefits from their cloud journeys, although 3/4 of the cloud journeys were aimed at becoming data-driven. So when we looked under the hood as to see what was the big reason for this aspirational gap, data access came out as one of the top reasons. So we asked companies, why is data not translated into actionable business insights? And lack of clearly governed or audited data access was one of the big reasons for 62% of organizations, and for 14% within that, it was a very critical challenge. So what are the top data security and access barriers today that organizations face that they tell us? And we heard a lot of that here in the room as well. It is very much, the first and foremost is data silos. Companies have adopted multiple clouds. They have their hybrid environments. They have different types of databases. So there is a lot of data silos. And when you have siloed data stores, you have siloed security, you have siloed policies, you have siloed culture of enablement. And that is a big problem for organizations that's holding them back. And the next one was this idea that there is lack of confidence in security and compliance. So companies were investing a lot more. They were increasing their security budgets year after year by 10 to 20%, but they were not getting value back because they were still very underconfident about their security postures. And that's because the security investment was very much on a perimeter level, very much on an infrastructure layer, and not connected to data. So companies need to abstract security and take it to the data layer to make sure they are a lot more resilient and secure. A lack of granular access controls came up as well. Companies were trying to see if they could save some money and create their own policies and put that across all the different data stores. But what then happened is it was very difficult for them to scale it, and there were different requirements when it comes to access for each of the data stores, and they couldn't really give them that. So it was very difficult to give fine-grained access controls to a lot of business users. So that was one of the big challenge as well. And skills comes up time and time again. We are just entering this talent war where a lot of organizations say that we really don't want to compete to hire for talent, so we might as well use managed services that we have and focus on our core competencies. So they're trying to get as much help as they possibly can to overcome the skills gap, whilst at the same time maintaining the pace of innovation. So there's this need to invest in data programs, not just from an innovation perspective, but also because of the European landscape, and I'll walk you through some of that in a minute. But access to granular data end-to-end in a business is something that organizations are aspiring for, because right now for a lot of organizations, it is not very good. It is still either poor, very poor, or just about okay, and they need to transcend it to either very good or excellent to really become successful. And other data-related challenges included lack of trust in data. So the data engineering team would provide data to the business users, but then the business users would look at that data and say, I might as well go with my gut because I don't trust this data. So there was lack of buy-in into the data as well. So lack of trust is a big problem from a strategy perspective for a lot of organizations. And the more you test data, the better the data gets. And for that, you need to make sure that the governance layer is strong. And data literacy is very much the cultural discussions that we had, and lack of tool investment. So there was technology that companies had to invest in. So all those other problems were also cited as key challenges. Now, we spoke a lot about hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, right? But how does that look in reality? So this is just very much the UK market. So we looked at which are the top 10 infrastructure and platform services in the UK market. And AWS is pretty big, but as you can see, the overall market is growing at 29%. AWS is still growing around the same mark, so 26, 27%. But if you look at things, if you look at Snowflake, it's growing pretty much 170%, right? So what's driving that is that organizations are now adopting niche data cloud or specialist cloud as part of their multi-cloud mix. And that brings in newer paradigms into their security considerations, because they had to relearn and they had to adapt their processes to this hyperscale world, and now they have these newer environments, and now they have to redefine their policies and redefine their operations again to this new world. So what companies end up is a very messy middle, as we at IDC call it. You start your cloud journey very happily. It looks like a very rosy picture. You put in some data into S3 buckets. You move your backup workloads. You move your archiving workloads in the cloud. You save a lot of money. It looks great. But then all these newer considerations come in when you look at moving crown jewel applications to the cloud or key things that you want to do in the cloud. So companies have to make sure that they are bringing in continuous value. They're making sure that their cloud costs remains under control. They want to look at data security, sovereignty, skills. There are so many different aspects that are affecting the cloud journey, and it really makes the cloud a very messy place for organizations. But they can find success in the middle of this messiness by making sure that they address the core needs of an organization, which very much is around security. We are also seeing data type shift. So what data type is key today compared to what data type was key 2 years ago is very, very different, or somewhat different. So you have structured data very much at the top back in 2020 or pre-2021. Sensitive data was very much up there as well. But if you look at 2023 and beyond, companies are saying that data from third parties, IT data, OT data, all those things are becoming, they're new. That's a new frontier for us, but they're all becoming important for us. So how do we deal with newer data types, and how do we adapt our governance capabilities to make sure we can deal with any data type? And one of the CDOs I really like, his quote where he said that, we want to treat all data equally, so we need a platform that helps us handle all different types of data so that we can use query engines to make sure we get all the data, we can synthesize all the data and make the right business decisions. Digital sovereignty is, the topic is almost exploding in Europe. Right now, there is a lot of confusion in the market, right? It's not a directive or a regulation, but it's very much a European principle where companies are thinking about it in a very practical way, where they're saying, okay, we need to have control, we need to be less reliant on anything outside of our organization, and we need to take a practical approach towards sovereignty. How do we make sure we have control of our software, of our data, of our operations, and of our people to make sure that whatever these storms of disruptions come, it doesn't affect us too much. So we asked companies, what are the main drivers behind your decision to adopt sovereign cloud solutions or embrace digital sovereignty? It was very much a for cloud approach that surprised us a little bit, where companies said we want to adhere to these sovereignty principles so that we can talk to the CISOs and the legal team and the regulators and tell them that, hey, we have taken all the right measures to adopt the cloud more, and that will accelerate our innovation. So expanding cloud use was one of the big drivers of digital sovereignty. Then, of course, there's compliance and industry regulations, and there was a lot of talk about data classification and data management. So how do we make sure we classify the data and keep the sensitive data in country to not breach any compliance or privacy laws? So national and regional legislation, as well as protection against extraterritorial data requests, so taking GDPR one level up. And the last one was very much around previous issues with compliance and security. When we tried to delve deeper, they all went quiet. Nobody wanted to share any bad stories about their organization. But clearly, they all adopted a minimum viable policy for GDPR in 2018, just as it came in. And then they realized that the cloud world exploded, and if they did an audit, it may go anyway. So they wanted to make sure that they have all these different issues, and they want to look at sovereignty as giving them a second opportunity to get better at their GDPR. So traditional data security, governance, and data access strategies are no longer successful. So I know we had a chat earlier in the morning where one of the leaders said that if there is data, businesses will find a way to leverage that data. So we see that's a very mature way of looking at things, but if you look at the broader market and smaller organizations, what our research shows is that only 32% of data that's available that enterprises can unlock for business value, only 38% is used. So 68% of business data is going unleveraged today. So there is a whole lot of potential waiting out there for organizations to tap into, and there are so many examples of the problems that I've highlighted. But it's changing. So chief data officers are leading the way. They are breaking down the persona barriers. They are trying to get closer to the security officers, to the privacy officers, to the legal officers, and they're all coming together to make sure how they can solve the security problems to focus a lot more on availability, and focus a little less on the confidentiality side of things, so that they take an availability first, they take a data first strategy, and those approaches to make sure they take their business to success. And this is a conceptual architecture that we came up with after talking to a lot of CDOs, where companies said we need a distributed data plane, so that part can be federated, but we need a unified control plane, and governance layer is at the heart of it, where we have a policy engine that helps us scale the policies that we put in as a business user in simple terms that can help us scale it across the different data stores that we have, and having those observability capabilities, which is very much also on the monitoring side, and having that control of data for sovereignty and protection purposes. So governance layer is something that organizations are looking at investing in, where they bring in all these different stakeholders together. So if you learn from the leaders, we saw that 19% of organizations were further ahead in their journeys. If you look at them, what are they doing, right? They are 3 times more successful in accessing data, in contextualizing data, and visualizing relevant data, and that's what's giving them all the success. So why are they able to do it? It's because they are taking a fresh approach to things. They are restructuring their data governance. They're not just buying in new technology, but they're completely adapting their processes. They're looking at operations. They're looking at breaking down those silos. And they're adopting these data mesh architectures, right? So they're saying that the data engineering team is right now such a big bottleneck, because they're getting all these requests from the data consumers, and the data producers have no hygiene. They just there's no standard or consistency in how they produce the data, and then the data engineering team has to do all the cleanup and provide the data to the data consumers, and that kind of strategy is no longer fit for purpose as companies scale. So they're looking at these data mesh environments where they can provide or specify data contracts that both sides, the parties, must adhere to and take accountability. So we're beginning to see a lot of change that these leaders are bringing into the play, and they are leveraging all these different kinds of technologies, whether it's access control technologies, whether it's governance technologies, security layer, or even all the capabilities in the cloud. They're bringing it all together to create that data mesh architecture. So we asked the same organization, so in terms of future, in the next 12 to 18 months, where are you going to invest? It's very much about we have started looking at our data governance and privacy environment. Now we need to operationalize it, automate it, and take it to scale across all our data environments because we see that it's working well for us. So operationalizing good data governance and privacy and compliance is something that they see as a continuous strategy, which is quite important. And then they're also a lot more open towards embracing innovative features like data lake, data mesh, or data lakehouse architectures, because then once they have operationalized that governance layer, it becomes a lot easier for them to adopt new technologies a lot faster. And then linking more KPIs and metrics to data, they are now trying to report to the board on data metrics. So companies are taking a very different view where they really see data as the currency of their business. I think this is pretty much nearing the end of my slides. I don't know how we're doing on time. Are we okay? Okay, cool. So the top trends is 41% of organizations are looking to test new concepts that we saw before, whether it's Lakehouse or data mesh. All these are coming in the next 2 years, right? So if you want to be equally competitive, you need to be exploring all these areas as well. And it starts from an experimentation layer, right? And you were talking about culture some time ago, right? This idea of blamelessness, where you can create a sandbox environment, and you can do all that in the cloud, but it's just that organizations need to get a buy-in from all the stakeholders to do that. But it's important to show these trends to those stakeholders who are saying no, because then otherwise companies will be left behind. And in the next 3 years, C-suite leaders are going to invest 40% more on enterprise and market intelligence. So they're looking at investing in third-party data or buying third-party companies. I mean, if you look at the recent acquisitions, whether it's IKEA or whether it's McDonald's, they have bought companies that's completely outside of their core competence, right? They have bought contextualization companies, they've bought AI companies, they've bought ML organizations, and they speak about these things in their earnings calls. So it means these things are becoming a lot more strategic from a key stakeholder perspective. So it's no longer just a specialist sitting in a dark room trying to do something, but data is everyone's business within an organization. And we see that a lot more C-suite that embrace that attitude and look at what's available in the third-party data are the ones who are most successful. And a quarter of organizations are also aiming to get at least 10% of their revenues from data products. And that's a long way to go. I mean, it's actually very ambitious to think about 10% monetization from data products, because companies are far away from that, because it requires them to create self-service when it comes to data products and put those data products or services on the shelf for their ecosystem to use. And for that to happen, you need to make sure that companies sort out their governance layer first. So it's a long journey, but it's an important one, and a quarter of organizations are really thinking of getting down that route. So the new mission is very much about balancing governance and innovation through all these different control planes, right? Now, IT resilience is very much the first step. So you have all these multiple clouds, you get your head around it, make sure it's operationally successful, and you take an application or a workload-driven control plane, and you run your IT in the smoothest way possible. That takes you to the next step where you're not just running IT, you're using IT to innovate. So you move from an IT resilience to a data resilience step, where you're having multiple applications and data sets, and you're able to deal with all that because you can scale all those governance policies that you have created. And the last one, where a lot of the 19% of organizations is very much looking at tech to compete. They're not just using IT to innovate, but they're becoming a technology company, and they're using that to compete. And they're creating that ecosystem-based plane, data plane and control plane, and they're moving beyond IT resilience and data resilience to this whole industry value stream resilience, where they can share data and continue to create newer products and services a lot faster than the market demands, and even sell those policies and APIs to others in that ecosystem to make sure they all have equal resilience, because when you share data, you are as weak as your weakest link. That's what happened in the SolarWinds supply chain attack, right? So you need to make sure that the ecosystem you play in, you share that advice, you share those policies, and you make sure the ecosystem is as resilient, and that helps organizations get to that tech-to-compete phase. And of course, unified security and trust underlies all that. And with that, I think, yeah, is it beer time? I don't know. Okay, cool, thanks.